grab the microphone from you. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And I guess I want to start by saying to Scott and the organizers that I so appreciate this motif of the cathedral because there's so many reasons. One is that I think it has such wonderful implications of aspiration, the bigness, the largeness, the volume of a cathedral is super aspirational, and I think that matters to our discussion. But also because I think that it allows us, or it gives us an opportunity to think about the foundation, which is key word here, the bottom floor. We can add some other words to it. The bottom floor of projects or institutions, what have you. And so, I'm going to just show one slide. I just have one slide. I think it gives us an opportunity to think about those ideas, if you will, that are at the ground floor of a project. So I have this one slide that depicts some of what's couched in the Black Arts Movement School Modality and the New Art School Modality, two projects that are underway that I'm busy with at the moment. And just quickly, there's a lot in these, but basically one of those values or ideas would be quite simply double intention, multiplex intention, multiplex dimensionality, and there's so many ways to get to that if you're somebody like myself who's tended to and paid close attention to African American and American traditions, but I'm actually consciously not wielding or leveraging Dr. Du Bois' notion of double consciousness here, but thinking about something that comes much more from a vernacular space, a more up-to-date space, a kind of routine space of double Dutch. And so, part of what is in the schools that's connected to to double Dutch as a metaphor of motif would be some of these notions of conflict that creates an institution, mostly conflicting notions of high or low that it has to grapple with, cross currents, like literally that kind of one goes this way and one goes the other way, that absolute need to jump in to the discipline and to the field and to do something regardless, and then I think also to think about the institutional and the non-institutional. So this is something I've had to grapple with a lot as I think about this, and that for me is also in this motif of something that has the complication of doing both of those at once. So that is the piece that I think allows me to be here in conversation with you, and I'm really excited to do so because I think these are real urgencies for us. I think if you are like me, we're constantly thinking about some of these as we pull together our projects. And so that leads me to the first question, which is for both of you, and it allows you to establish in your own words the work you do, since there wasn't a long introduction about that, to expose some of those mechanics of your projects. What are those crucial interventions? What are the crucial ideas, back to the ideas, and the stakes of what you're up to in your projects as a way of introducing us to them. And so, Albert, I think we'll start with you, if that's okay.
So this is working. It's really a wonderful framework that you have set, because it allows really to explain how the work that I do currently came about. Because initially, I was trained as an artist and designer and worked for maybe initial 7 years or so only as an artist and designer, exhibiting internationally. But the work itself did not have space in the Kosovo context. So to explain, I come from Kosovo. I was born there. I survived 10 years of occupation, then a liberation, NATO intervention, and recreation of many institutions which existed before the occupation. But the art scene itself is in an interesting position. The education system established in the 70s still lacks an art history department. It doesn't have a department of curatorial studies. So everything is done by artists, which gives a lot of room, a lot of possibilities, but difficulties arise as well. So I prepared some sort of a summary maybe to share with you, because, and I have to thank Renaud, ICI, and EXPO Chicago for the invitation. And for me, it was an invitation also to react on the framework that they sent, actually. And the framework is very challenging. The positions are very challenging, and I thank Scott as well, Megan and everyone who made this possible. In responding to the invitation, I was really confronted with a fundamental question. I was like, what does a meaningful contribution look like at this moment and this historical context in the US? I was like, what can I show that really responds to the context or to the given time? So the one approach, and what normally is expected of us, is like sharing strategies and experiences from the process of building resilient institutions, independent institutions, or reformed institutions, as Renaud would see them, who can build and maintain relations and coalitions with communities and other institutions, alliances, for a future when they and the society are able to engage, maybe even in conflict with politicians wielding power through state mechanisms. Be that in Kosovo, geography and worldview that at first glance has no comparison with, or may have little in common with the current situation in the United States. I mean, not only the size and scale, but historical development. But what made this exercise even more challenging was when reading the text of the invitation itself. And I found myself seeing the unsaid, the gestures between the lines, the non-spoken text in the invitation, so to say. So I'll briefly speak to some of those elements, if we'll have time. And I will also share the uncovering of rather unexpected similarities between Kosovo, which is the primary focus of my doctoral research, and the United States, particularly in the censorship practices of the 1980s in the socialist Kosovo and socialist Yugoslavia, and what seems to be the current governmental strategies aimed at censoring and controlling content in art institutions and museums in the US. Or perhaps more precisely, and this is ongoing, this is still fresh, I would like to briefly discuss the meaning of the so-called restoring truth and sanity to American history, the executive order issued on March 27, 2025 by President of the United States, Donald Trump, and the specific role of the Vice President in this process, mentioned clearly in the executive order. To illustrate, I will show a few images, but initially I just wanted to introduce a book that I found on the room where we are staying, on the table actually, and it says, "Art is the highest form of hope." And to me this was another, I was like, okay, let's see. So what does this mean? So basically, the story starts to share with you the story about an institution as a strategy started in 2006. So the whole idea was how to create a larger front, let's say, because until then I was working only as an artist, in some point quite effective maybe to intervene in certain positions in Kosovo, positions of power as well, but then how do you build a larger coalition, more people, a larger framework, and then an institutional setting, also creating a history with work. So in discussion, initially with a partner in crime, a friend and collaborator, an architect, an art historian who graduated art history in New Zealand, not in Kosovo, there's no art history department, and a sociologist, basically. So this was the structure, the initial structure. After the initial establishment of the idea, we founded an institution. The first thing we did, we bought a domain, basically, domain name. So it was the first thing, actually, and the name is Stacion, so it's stacion.org. It's very easy to find it. It's not difficult. And in the first instance, the idea was to document everything, because all past projects in Kosovo are non-existent anymore. And what usually happened was that they were funded, let's say, in some way. Groups of artists were organized. As soon as the funding went away, they ceased to exist. And you cannot trace them anymore. So a domain, a domain basically, like website, let's say. And then creating space for dialogue. Dialogue was non-existent, basically. You could not even invite an artist to do an artist presentation. An artist presentation was like a different format completely. The school was training artists, mostly painters, sculptors, to communicate with the public through their artworks. So a painter does not speak, a sculptor does not speak, so the work speaks. If you speak, if you say something, you could actually damage and this is typical French school, let's say, idea, and the Academy of Arts in Kosovo creates artists that know the craft, but theoretically they're not educated to communicate to a larger audience. Two initial conferences, both designed to discuss the issues of nationalism in contemporary art, or crisis management, because post-war Kosovo meant that there's a divided society. Serbs, who used to run the country, are isolated in a new situation. The majority of Albanians cannot communicate in a new reality. So these were the initial challenges. And bringing forward art workers, artists from other geographies, also from Serbia, to discuss in meaningful dialogue, because I thought dialogue never ceased to exist, even during occupation. But artists were, in a way, not able to share the discussions that we had. So we would meet internationally, but could not bring forward these discussions in our context. And I thought these would serve as an example to the rest of the society. Because yes, we should be able to discuss and confront ideas, even engage in conflictual situations. So these were two initial attempts, then to create an exhibition space which could host, let's say, projects, artists, create a sort of a shield for them to work in that context and be fast, responsive, and autonomous, always autonomous in that sense.
Do you want to show any slides?
Yes. Still, I'm not there still. So, and then let's say different collaborations, international collaborations, to show examples, actually, because let's say not to have this idea that we only show artists from the outside. We show Kosovo artists all the time, but also examples, and through those examples help the art scene to grow. It was, I don't know how it came about actually, but then we came in a position to collaborate with major institutions, bigger projects. And I'm going to mention a few which connect Kosovo and United States. And I always thought that we have a lot to share or to learn from, even though we are a very small reality, geography. In 2012, Stacion was invited by the Bronx Museum to collaborate for a project initiated by the US Department of State called Smart Power. Smart Power was designed to create residency programs for 47 US-based artists internationally. In Kosovo and Turkey, the program developed projects. These were only 2 locations in Europe. We were a partner organization. What's relevant maybe to mention it, what kind of a project we selected. And briefly, I'm going to explain if I can. So we were sent a list of projects that applied for the grant. And we were told, usually first 2 in the list get selected, but we liked the project that was 3rd or 4th, actually. And we sent our recommendation, and we said we would like to select this project. There was a project by a group called Red 76. It's an interesting duo. They proposed discussing themes that were relevant for us, more specifically the issue of power. For us, it was very important because in Kosovo, if you mention the notion of power, almost everyone thinks the United States, right? Because this is the country that somehow saved people there, and it's whenever there's a big crisis happening, everyone somehow turns to the US Embassy. And this was, for us, relevant. So how a US-based duo discusses the issue of power in a project funded by the US Department of State, hosted by the US Embassy, who was actually power in the context. And of course, it was challenging. It was not easy, but it was the first time that we had a larger project, well-funded project, and we were able to maintain the integrity of the project throughout the way. And I'm going to just show a few images of what the project was. Okay, so as part of the project, it was called This is the Front, Henry. The duo planned to create a relational space where discussions would happen, but at the same time, the artist would prepare food. So this is a pizza oven that was constructed. We called it an American pizzeria, basically. This is Samuel Gold, one of the members of the duo. This is one of the exhibition spaces that we administer presently. Everyone was involved in constructing, let's say, the project. He was not very handy, so it was for the first time that he was constructing something. We had to make the oven and everything. What was wonderful about the project was that we understood that the US Embassy in Kosovo has a sort of a mail address in Washington. So if you want something from the US and you send it to this mail address, magically it comes to Kosovo directly. So no customs, nothing. So it was just fantastic. So we ordered projectors, printmaking equipment, because we were basically copying publications, no copyrights, nothing. We were copying and distributing publications. This is how the room looked. And before the project started, we promoted the project extensively. We went to the American University, which is the largest investment of the Albanian community in the US, made in education in Kosovo. So they created an education institution, which is very interesting. So that's a presentation there. This is the opening of the museum. These two officials are the officials of the US Embassy. After the project ended, they were very professional with us. They told us that their biggest job, because we advertised heavily each project, was to keep the project away from the US ambassador. This is one of the posters, basically, that we used. And then this brings me to ICI, how we met. Basically, we had, for a long time, we were discussing with Hans-Ruli Obrist, a collaboration project. And in the end, he proposed, do it. It was not our kind of a project in the first instance, basically. It was not our cookie somehow. But then we found a way how to work with it, actually. ICI supported us in the project, which was fantastic. It didn't have a large budget or anything significant. The whole idea was how to communicate this project to a larger context. So there are artist instructions, basically. What we did is we just installed the project in the exhibition space. So 5 publications. People could come and read the instructions. Other iterations of the project meant that the institution would also produce some of the instructions. We took a different approach. We allowed everyone to read instructions, but didn't control if someone would actually do the instructions. We also decided to collaborate with mainstream media, so TV stations, printed media. We had TV stations basically collaborating with us, reading the instructions live on TV. And this is like the main news time in one of the TV stations. This is another which says like close the curtains in the planet at the same time but slowly. So Walter Caldas, 2012. I like some of them more. They were carefully selected, what makes sense in that context. For instance, watch the television without the sound on for 1 hour. It was an instruction, another instruction, or start a gossip. And even in today's reality, or then, gossip has become almost everything. I'm going to briefly show a few images of another project which connects a bit with the last part of my short presentation. This is a project that somehow came about when I started working on my PhD. It was a totally coincidence in the doctoral journey. A few other researchers won a grant from the same project that I was funded. And someone could not curate the exhibition, and they asked me, like, could you do it? And I said, sure, let's see. So basically a 2-week exercise. It meant I had access to a research, but it was not an academic research. It was sort of a semi-artistic research around a music festival initiated in 1980s in Kosovo. After student demonstrations in 1981 in Pristina. Student demonstrations were important because they challenged the existing order. There are different takes on what were the demonstrations. The music festival was initiated by the Socialist Youth Association to try to address growing nationalism. The music festival featured bands from all ethnicities and communities. But in today's reality, when I was reading the research, those same musicians were telling a different story. And the researchers were, in a way, painting them as dissidents and erasing parts of the research. You know, like the research itself was called a homage to the musicians and whatever. And as a researcher, when you get this material and you do a bit of further research, then you reveal a different reality. In the end, we did an exhibition for it. We unearthed some of the archival materials from the public television from that time. This used to be the secretary of the Communist Party of Kosovo, which was, let's say, pushed to resign after those protests, very important in the context. Some documentation was as well made visible in the exhibition, and above everything else, maybe it's important to mention, we created 3, how do you call them, like music lists or something, with all the bands that were exhibited in the showcased in the festival from all ethnicities and languages. And they are still available on YouTube. Everyone can go and you can listen to the music from that time. What is important to mention as well was this sort of artifact, which was also exhibited, and this was the only artifact in the exhibition that you could take with yourself from the exhibition. It showcases how censorship was performed in Kosovo in 1985. So Kosovo had only one production studio, audio production, music production studio. It was centralized. And in 1985, a children's writer was hired to perform sort of a correction position, control of content, basically. And there he edited, let's say, a song of a new wave band, which was called Bankrot. Bankrot was also problematical as a name in 1985 because you could not say that Yugoslavia has bankrupted, basically, in 1985. And the title of the song was "We Are in a Toilet. We are in WC," basically. Yeah. And he edited the song and made it, had very interesting comments about it. It's like, this doesn't make sense, what is this language? Similar, but he pressured the band to name the song "We Are in CC." And CC doesn't mean anything, basically. So with this new title, they could record. But when performing in music events, again, they retained the old title, right, the original title. But it also showcases how actually censorship was performed. And in relation to this context, I'm really puzzled how Vice President of the United States will perform censorship in museums. And it's very interesting because they come from the same background, accidentally. He's also a writer. And this is, I think, the challenge. And when ICI asks, what next? I think this is what is coming next.
Right. Well, let's dig into that. Thank you so much for the share. I think we have, a much better overview of the practice and some of the interventions and stakes. We definitely want to hear from Kelli. So Kelli, can you expose some of what you are up to and again, some of those ideas that are key to you that play through this project?
Albert, can you hand me the clicker?
Yeah, this right
That
there.
thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Romi. So for me, it was a set of questions, right? It's like I started out coming out of Black Studies, and I am trained, as a cultural historian, right? So I came into, American art. I stopped saying it, but I used to say I get pulled into contemporary art kicking and screaming, because I am a historian, right? And this, how exactly did you get here? Question would come up all the time, primarily because I'm an Americanist, right? So I would be in primarily the only, the sort of fly in the buttermilk, right? And at first I used to think it was such a strange question, because I was like, what do you mean? I went to school, I got a degree, I got a job, did a couple of fellowships. But then I realized that it was actually a pejorative thing, right? Where it was how exactly did you get here? Because I wasn't the kind of Black, right, that the institutions were looking for, right, so to speak. And so that led me to ask myself, right, these two questions. Okay, so what is the global, right, that produces the museum? What then centralizes the curator, right, within that space? And then most importantly, why? Because I was kind of working backwards, right? I was coming into the field, 2014, right? So we're at the height of the kind of diversity, right, conversations. This was also really the height of the Melanin Forward Diversity Fellowships, right? 11 years later, I think there's only 4 of us who are actually still in the field, who started out, right, in those fellowships. And unfortunately, the answer, right, that I came up with was white, patriarchal, capitalism and colonialism. So it sent me kind of down this rabbit hole of we're having all this conversation about Blackness, right, and contemporariness, but nobody's talking about the elephant in the room. I call it exotic chicken syndrome, right, where you're it's a duck, and everybody in the room would be no, it's this new genetically modified chicken, and I'm I'm pretty sure that's a duck, right? And so I made these kind of statements, right? These are actually quotes from an essay, right, that I wrote to really dig into this is the reality, right, that we're dealing with. So if the museum sector, right, is a colonial space, zoos, botanical gardens, right, aquariums, ethnographic museums, national history museums are what kind of white male colonizers envisioned the world to be, right, through their own lens. Thus, the art museum exists as the exclusive space where they exhibit themselves and how they see themselves to exist within that world, right? So it was okay, well, I'm standing on the shoulders, right, or the foundation of, Black artists, Black women, right, curators and artists, so you think Faith Ringo, Benny Andrews, right, Lowry Stokes Sims, all the people who have done the work of kicking the doors down. So I was well, now I'm also I also have this critical mass of colleagues, right, who's continuing that work. I was what is the need? What can I do that nobody else is doing? and the risk, right? Like willing to take the risk to do it. So I said, I'm gonna call out, right, like how whiteness is structured, which led me to, the Black feminist philosophies that informed how I worked. So this was a major one, this quote by Audre Lorde, where it's like, we have to take responsibility, right? So you can't just say the thing, right, and then not do something about what it is, right, you're calling out. And so I went into developing this curatorial philosophy that I was like, it's about care, empowerment, and community, right? So it is about saying the thing and then taking the action. So like you were saying, jumping in and actually doing something. So in these images, it's like I would do my own school tours, right? Which was like unheard of, at PAFA or at Newfields. It was, and then it became this like, well, that's, you're stepping on the docent terrain, right? You're not doing the proper thing as a curator, or that's not what a curator is supposed to do. And I was like, as long as there are Black and brown kids coming through this institution where I am the only Black or brown person, this is what I'm going to do, right? And you're going to deal with it or not. And what I found in doing this, right, was that, particularly for the littles, like the top image, Black kids, particularly coming out of like, what we like to call, right, at-risk, situations, have an immense amount of visual literacy. So they would speak back, right, to the docents in terms of like what they saw. Docents, no shade, but being, middle-aged, older white women would then say, well, no, that's not actually what that is. And then being in the room myself, I could say, actually, right, that's a image of like a necktie and like a shoe. What are those things called? It's a Jacob Lawrence painting that I'm actually referencing. But they're like the shoe storage holders, right? That like every Black mama and aunt has like had on the back door, right? And they're like green and yep, they're like these from the 70s, But the kids could recognize that. And it was like, that was the moment, where I was just like, oh yeah, no, there will be no more docent tours of urban schools, particularly when I was in Indiana. So that was, how I started to kind of put myself in the place. This is a really early picked image. This is me and Theodore Harris in PAFA's galleries. Because what the institutions really want you to do is commission the contemporary artists, right? To, so let's like get with Titus Kaphar, right? Let's call Simone Lee, let's put up the Kehinde Wiley, right? To have these conversations. And I was like, nope. What we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about these Gilbert Stewarts and these Charles Wilson Peels, and these John Singer Quinn Copleys. And I am going to demonstrate how whiteness has been structured, right? Through American history painting, right? Or through American portrait painting. And then I realized that, again, as a scholar of Black studies, I became even more of an issue because I didn't need Black contemporary artists, right, to do these interventions. I could actually do it, right, with the colonial work, going back to like the 17th century. And that really pissed a lot of people off, so I did that all the time, right? This is probably what people know me mostly for in that regard, doing it at Indy. To, one of Miranda's earlier points, it's like, it should be a working democracy. That's not actually how it works, right? So we try to do it. Sometimes your executive staff, like in this case, right, gets in the way. And it was fascinating the way, his name is Charles Venable, but the way that he sort of lashed out at us all wasn't because the work was offensive, right? It was because the work was actually working. And the majority of our audience were white, right? So again, to like one of Miranda's earlier points, it's like there are more people who actually want to have these conversations. The stake, and then I'll toss it back to you, Romi, was resigning publicly, knowing, right, that I would never get hired again, right? Doing it scared in the height of COVID. This was maybe 6 weeks, after George Floyd's death. But for me, it was very much like this is work that I feel like I was really led to, spiritually. because this was not the plan, right? And it was, you have to take the steps of faith. So like Miranda was saying, like, you plan for it, to go wrong, but what happens when everything goes right? And it's like, I want to, kind of encourage you that, like, you can do the thing, right, that nobody says you can do, right? I can't tell you how many people were like, that's not going to work. You're never going to be able to get a job. And I was like, probably not, right? But it's the right thing to do. And I am scared as hell. And so I would say, I got this rock, kind of like David and Goliath. I was like, I got this rock. He's like one of the most kind of, interesting, right, museum directors in the country. I'm going to just throw this rock, right, and see what happens. And then he kind of stepped in it himself, right? So I got the public vindication, and then got other jobs, too. But I do it, and I'm so vocal about it, right, to your point, because it's like, we don't talk about it, but everybody's experiencing it. Whether it's racial discrimination, sexual harassment, gender discrimination, right, ableism, like, it is happening to us every day, all day, traditional institutions, in certain cases, even in culturally specific institutions, right? Because culturally specific institutions don't necessarily have the extraction, right, of the colonial model. But because the best practices, right, are the white major institutions, right? Everybody's like shooting to be the Met, right, or Whitney. You have that toxic workplace culture, right? And so everybody's kind of talking around it, right, or trying to work through it. But for me, I was like, I am going to build not the solution, right, but some kind of solution to it. And that's what Black Artist Archive is.
Love it. Thank you so much, both of you, for the shares around this. I mean, I think it's really, really important that where you started, which is why did I do this? It's actually really frightening and hard. Like, the level of hard is intense. And the kind of fear that is constantly there. I think when one is starting of what I'm talking about, laying a foundation for something, it's really, really tough to be at the ground floor, to start something at the bottom level. We involve ourselves and connect and jump in to most of the things that we're involved in at some other level. Right. Some other historical, temporal moment when it's fairly established. It's actually incredibly frightening, and so I love that you shared that. The question I have for both of you, based on what you just mentioned, is, it's so interesting that in the critique of censorship, if you will, Albert, and of, white supremacy within the context of museums, there's innovation. So this innovation, the connection between innovation and critique is so close at an ideological level. But I guess I want to get to a granular level of this. We're thinking about levels and foundations. If you could both speak to whether or not you've also had to consider innovation that's a little bit less exciting, maybe, which is at the level of resourcing and funding. Oh, God. So yeah. How does, right, you get what I'm saying? It's not the whatever fun is in this. For some of us, it's the idea piece. There's less fun for many people at the level of having to resource and figure out how the thing is going to be sustainable. So yeah, the question I have is about how you've been innovative in your approach to resourcing and funding. What strategies have you come up with, and how fresh, how have those also created a kind of innovative model that other people can dig into?
Sure. So for us at BI, I started or I should say we started the Black Curatorial Institute, right? So it's basically like an online learning center. The curriculum began during my time at Tufts, and I can talk a little bit more about that if people want me to. But I left Tufts primarily because they put a $40,000 price tag, right, on a graduate certificate, and I was like, absolutely not. But in that moment, it's like, again, learning what you learn, like, when you're in it. And I was like, well, I don't actually need two things. I don't actually need a university, right, to teach the courses. I just need a robust online platform. Secondly, my student audience, right, were all of you, right? Or like museum arts and cultural professionals. You don't need another degree, right? You just need the information. And so when I got that point, I was like, deuces, to Tufts. I remember my dean was like, well, what are you going to do? And I was just like, I don't know, but I'm not doing this with y'all no more. And I left. And we launched BCI, so I like kind of made it more robust in November of last year. And it's priced right now like on our website for institutions, right? So if you have like professional development funds in your budget, if you do want to enroll as an individual, let me know. I'll send you the half off discount code. But this is our, long story short, this is our income driver. This is our earned income. So we pull in funds, you know, from these courses. And we're in the process, we haven't done it yet, but we're in the process of investing. Because what you can do as a nonprofit is you can actually like invest your earned income funds, right, to earn from the market. And we're like talking to financial, because that is like so over my head, right? But my team is here, you know, with me, and my COO, Reginald Dockery, like that's kind of his lane. And so we're trying to figure out, you know, how do we kind of live off of our own interests. We have community partners that we are having discussions about how to create a collective endowment, right? So how we all kind of put money in a pot, right? And then put that pot into the market, you know, and it feeds us, it feeds back, right? To not just Black Artists Archive, but like to the collective, because it's 3 organizations all together.
Got it. And Albert, what have you done to fund some of these things?
It's an interesting question, and maybe this is where the big difference between the American context and the Kosovo context lies, because we come from a sort of a socialist legacy where arts were funded through the system. So there were no private galleries or private donors or collectors or anything. And it's interesting maybe just to share how it worked, actually. And it was not heavily centralized, as usually we imagine. For instance, if the state would build a hotel, and we have the Grand Hotel in the center of the city, which had a fantastic collection inside, they would commission new artwork. And there would be an expert team who would go throughout studios of artists and commission new artworks. So they were supported in diverse ways, the art scene. Not only directly through, let's say, state bodies. In today's reality, in post-war Kosovo, almost everything that existed in terms of these structures was dismantled. Let's say large portions of our economy were privatized, and they were socially owned before, privatized quite cheaply. And nowadays, the majority of funding for independent institutions come from the public budget, actually. There's the Ministry of Culture. There's no Ministry of Culture in the United States. And there are some possibilities through new legislation, which was just introduced a few years ago, through, let's say, it's called the Law on Sponsorships, which creates some possibilities that companies could engage in sports, arts and culture, and get some tax reductions when they pay taxes. What is maybe important to mention, initially when we started to work, we sent the proposals to the Ministry of Culture only when they launched an open call. And this was, I think, 2008 or something. Before, there was not even an open call. And still, we saw projects being sponsored. So you had to find a way how to push. And for us, this was lack of transparency. So we sent the first proposals merely for them to read what we are doing, actually. So we didn't expect support. The first support we got from foundations, like European foundations, European Cultural Foundation, larger grants, and then slowly the public budget started supporting our program, but nothing significant. Nowadays, and what we realized was that whatever you write, actually, this is not very fashionable to say, but no one actually reads what you're writing. So it's
true.
they divide the public budget based on who is who or something. And we were joking with, let's say, a documentary festival organized in Kosovo, DocuFest. Let's just switch the logos, and just test, see what happens, because they don't really read. But what is horribly, and I did horribly wrong, I did the research on public policies in Kosovo, and I realized that they don't even read the programs and proposals of the public institutions.
Yes.
and they give the budget without actually it going through an evaluation.
Yeah, I was like, can I just
And
add really quickly?
It's horrible, yeah.
To to
Yeah.
that point, Albert, like something we found out recently, right? Like federal funding is gone, right? So we can just like hang that up.
It's still not gone completely.
Not, I think it's gonna be. And now I think private foundation is precarious, right? It's unreliable.
What Renaud mentioned, this idea of conformity is very risky in
Yeah.
this situation,
Yep.
because let's say censorship is instituted by power, but then self-censorship, how you
Yeah.
behave in this situation, when foundations try to align
Yeah.
with one or
Yeah.
another ideology.
And it was a
What you're both saying is that, there was a period, I love this story, that they don't even read. I think what Kelly might be saying is now they're over-reading. They're reading
Right.
very carefully, underlining,
And they're
circling,
waiting.
and
Not
finding
over-reading,
things
they
that
are
like.
just going after words and, no, it's-
yeah, like when we got that
they're
whole
not-
list,
no,
yeah.
it's,
Because like we approached, which I have a long relationship, with my contacts at Mellon and Ford. And this was like August, right, of last year. And they're just like, oh, Kelly, this is great. We'll kind of keep like a pin in it. Because we've allocated our full fiscal year 25 budget and our full fiscal year 26 budget. And I was like, jinkies, right? So for Ford, I was like, okay, well, Darren's leaving. That kind of makes sense. There's not going to be an executive director. For Mellon, that's odd, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to just sit back and wait. So then late February, right, March happens, the executive directives start coming over, and I was like, oh, smart. So they're going to wait and see what the market does for the next 2 years. We're left to just kind of figure it out, right? Right? So it's like so my advice is like if you can survive, like on your projects or even as an institution, like to January 27, right, you'll know kind of what they're looking for.
Well, that's why this question of innovative resourcing, I think, is super important. It leads me to another question that's related, and especially related at the level of kind of grants and proposals, et cetera. It has to do with the criteria for success. So how are you all, and I'm thinking about this a lot too, how are you recalibrating, reforming nodes of success? Usually this is around like longevity. I'm writing something right now about how to fold.
Yes.
It's like knowing how to fold, how to disappear as an institution because they're going quiet.
Yeah.
Institutions may have to do that. So I guess I'm wondering about how when you get to that question or think about it yourself around the success being getting to the cathedral moment when it's that big and that magnanimous, that might not happen for some of these endeavors, and it seldom does. So
Right.
how are we being okay with that, and how are we establishing that as its own sort of ground so that people don't completely undervalue the projects and the institutions, even though they can't live forever ever?
Yeah. For me, it's very spiritually based. Like, I'm super grounded, in God, right, in Christ. And, like, because, again, like I said, this was not my plan, right? And so my measure of success is two things. Am I doing what God wants me to do, right, in the current space? Or am I learning what God wants me to learn or what I feel like God wants me to learn? And once I know the answer to those two questions, that dictates, right, what my next phase is. So I'm going to, like, my former fearless leader, Neil Barclay, is here in the audience with us today. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Neil. So I worked for the Wright Museum, with Neil for like 6.5, almost 7 months, really greatly. And what led me to buy, was working on an exhibition that, Neil and I and another colleague had kind of conceptualized. And the more we did oral histories, and the, older generation of artists in Detroit, and people were like, Kelly, can you help me catalog this? Do you know somebody that can help me digitize? And then they open up the basement and it's like a whole archive, right? So I was like, okay, maybe this is where I'm going. So I resigned, right, from the Wright, because I was like, well, I actually do know people, right, who can kind of help me help, these elders or help their descendants. And it was a hard decision to make, right, because it was just like, well, the Wright is the space, right? The Wright is the model for NAMOC in D.C., but it's like being in, knowing the kind of internal mechanisms. And I was like, well, there's like the infrastructure isn't there, like the foundation is there. So then what can we do, you know, as BA, right, to provide kind of more scaffolding, you know, that can exist alongside the right, because DIA doesn't actually, you know, collect archives. And it was one of those things. It's like you have to, like, I'm very much so like go with my gut, you know. So success for me is like if I really feel like, you know, I'm following the way kind of spirit is leading, right? Understanding my assignment, you know, that was another thing. Like people can look at my career and maybe say, you know, the sector would define it as like a series of failures, right? But knowing that the assignment, you know, for the Tufts job was to build the curriculum, right? Knowing that my assignment at Newfields was to unseat that director. For me, it was never about the exhibitions or the publications, right? It was always structural.
Right, so that's so fascinating because it shows that even these, the innovative quality of these projects also forces us, or it's not like it's a terrible thing, but allows us to be privy to a different set of answers and responses around that kind of thing, like, you know, that God or spirit of faith would show up in a conversation or a context like this is actually really, really unique and fresh and magical, so thank you.
And then, add maybe just because it's a different context again. It's for us the possibility to continue and not stop even when confronted with brutal power is success. Because like I remember 2015, let's say a change in government, a new power structure came at the Ministry of Culture, a bit more right-wing by accident. And the idea was they didn't like the notion of independent institutions. So, and in Kosovo, it's a legacy of 90s. In 90s, there were no more central institutions. The hierarchy was dismantled with the occupation. So everyone was equally, let's say, discriminated. So you didn't have the National Gallery, you didn't have the Academy, you didn't have the role of these magnitudes of artists. So you would have in a cafe gallery an exhibition of a very prominent painter. Next, there would be a group exhibition of students. You know, so but it gave a sense of, let's say, horizontal organization in the scene itself. This particular minister and the government didn't like that idea. So for them, it was very important to have potent, strong vertical organization, the dominance of state-funded institutions, and they called these tendencies foreign, basically. So independent organizations which were built during the resilience of 90s, which were actually resisting, let's say, occupation, for them were no longer necessary. And brutally, they attacked few institutions, among some, those who were more vocal, who were also a sort of a political subject in the public sphere. And the public sphere for us was always important. So not only to do exhibitions, but how to throw the exhibition outside, let's say, of small exhibition spaces or our immediate context. And in that sense, the success of us staying where we were in the same exhibition spaces, because the first attack was after the public spaces that we use. And those politicians are no longer there. This was the first measure of success, because we lived in a context where the idea existed that state is never wrong. And I was pushing, even in media, saying state can be wrong. Sure. You know, like, because they issued an order we should leave the space in 3 days, and I said, come on, guys, even when the Serbian occupation was here, when we received a similar order, they gave us 2 weeks. Oh, you know, what is this? So just to show how unprofessional, but maybe
well, I think also it speaks to, I mean, I love that you use the word brutality, because I think brutality, we're getting to another level, you know, and I think for our last question, it should go to this level, you know, at the level of brutality that institutions can wield, which gets us, you know, to a very different place, demands a different set of strategies. Yes. They're not nice in a way on our part either. And the question this leads me to, again, something I've been thinking a lot about, but would love to do so with the two of you and others, it is about omission. So, You, Albert, mentioned, the wonderful moment of documenting, and I think a lot of us have learned to document and over-document the things we do because that's how we kind of create a record, and we know the archive is failed in so many ways for other historical periods. But perhaps there are strategies of omission, things we shouldn't share, things we shouldn't speak to, because in moments of brutal censorship or brutal wielding of power, which we might be in the space of that as well here. And I'm going to use an example because I also take cues from certain things. And one of the cues is from Mr. Frederick Douglass in his narrative from 1845, where he gets to chapter 11, and he writes, "Now I come to the part of my life during which I planned and finally succeeded in making my escape from slavery. But before narrating any of the particular circumstances, I deem it proper to make known that my intention is not to state all the facts connected with the transaction." And we know the reasons, right? You can't tell, when it's brutal, the stakes are brutal, you don't tell your whole story. So I'm just wondering if, there are practices and things that you're withholding, that you're keeping close. And again, Albert, this comes from your example where things are quite dire, but maybe we can end with that question, because we do have to go to questions from the community.
The first step for us, for myself, was always reading properly the challenge or the situation. To go back, this minister came, and initially we thought they don't know what they're doing, right? Because they influenced in such a way arts and culture and the public interest that we had even meetings with the president of Kosovo, because she's in charge of foreign, let's say, relations, and all these organizations have very important networks internationally, and she thought they are damaging the public interest. What happened at that time was interesting. Two things, actually. We were discussing for a long time creating a new museum in Kosovo, Museum of American Art, which is a very interesting project. Actually, I'm going to show just a few images of it. It includes, for instance, ICI administers one exhibition which is in relation to Museum of American Art, but as a strategy, it came at the right time. What is Museum of American Art? Actually, Museum of American Art is an education institution which remembers the initial exhibitions of MoMA and the international program. So the international program designed, let's say, late 20s, 30s, to bring forward a new narrative, a new story. When Europe was exhibiting art according to national schools, MoMA introduced another narrative, which today is a canon, actually. We don't know how long it will stay, but it is presently the canon. They focused on internationalism, they focused on individualism and modernity. Finally, after several attempts, we managed to bring forward the works, transporting works from locations which are not very easy to transport, and we opened the Museum of American Art in a very contested space. So this was a space which the Ministry of Culture wanted us out of. And the project started years ago. It didn't really, we didn't plan for it to become like how to put it, a safekeeping space of an exhibition. But in a way, it turned to something like that. This is how it looks, and what is important even today, so it documents exhibitions from 30s, then few exhibitions and the contribution of collectors and similar, and all this is done by a private institution. It's not a state or public institution. In the end, I will just stop here. This is like the mission statement of the institution, and the logo of the institution is also very important. And I'll show why. It's basically, the logo is based on the logo of the 1930 International Exhibition of Modern Art in New York, known as the Armory Show. The elm tree in the middle dates from the 18th century American Revolution, used a symbol of freedom known as Liberty Tree. It was reused by organizers of the Armory Show as a symbol of liberty in the arts. And I think these are some of the values that we are always trying to safeguard. So for the arts to be space for experimentation, space for conflict. And if these spaces are no longer there, the society is going in a direction that Renaud and ICI rightly asks what's next.
And then Kelly just, and maybe it's about kind of a practice of not sharing it.
Yeah, like there are 4 frameworks that I use. I use the Black abolitionist framework from like the 1830s, the SNCC Freedom Summer, framework from 64, SCLC's framework for Project C in Birmingham, and I can send you guys like the citations for where you can find these, and then the Black Panther Party like 10-point, right? So like for me and Indy, like and it's interesting like in hindsight now where people were just like, how was she doing that? And that's what I was doing. I had like kind of put the Black Panther 10-point plan like on top of the SCLC plan. And then kind of work the grassroots around, his outward narrative, right? So it was like no matter where he showed up to sort of defame, us as a staff or like me as a person, I had already like planted the seeds with people, and prepared people. I kind of got in front of them as best I could, right, from the Project C, framework, and had kind of prepared people that I was like, he's gonna come. I don't know when, but this is what he's going to say, right? And this is what your response to be. So despite, hiring a PR firm and all of that stuff, like I was able to control the narrative. Mm-hmm.
Thank you both so much. I think we're at the place where we can have some questions from you, but thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I got you. Thank you all so much for your presentation and your comments. I have a question just thinking about Miranda's presentation from earlier about collaboration and partnerships, and then thinking about the shifting political landscape that we're in now that will require probably more partnerships, especially because of the economic precarity that we're all going to be moving through. So I'm wondering, in thinking about strategies and techniques, how you all are kind of redefining your standards for partnership and collaboration with people, especially thinking about who you can working with people you can trust. And just how you are nurturing those dynamics as well, too.
Yeah. For us, it's more because, like, we don't have a building. It's really, like, me, Reggie, and my colleague, David, and we just kind of go to people that already have archives, right? And it's like a barter system to a degree. So our major archival partner is their brother and sister team, Ali and Alima Wheeler. And they have their own, like, 501c3. The collection itself is their dad's collection. It's a major collection of Black material culture that they have just in a storage unit. So me and David and Reggie, like, go out to the storage unit, with our computers and gloves and all the things to work on the 2 projects that we're working on. What they kind of give us in return is, like, we signal boost for each other, and then they allow me to use objects or archival materials from the collection in my classes. And eventually, like, we'll, put some of that stuff on display, as well. But it's more so like a kind of, what do you need, right? Like, what can we do? It's like almost a barter system. Or not almost, I think it really is. It's like we kind of helped them, with catalog, and they kind of helped us with space, right, and materials to show.
Yeah, strategies are always important, and maybe just to share, I mean, we are also a member and a founding member of a network of independent arts and culture organizations, institutions in Kosovo, and it was used as a political subject in the public sphere when confronting power very often. It was designed to protect independent sector. It was hard work, actually. So we had to meet, I personally had to meet and discuss with, let's say, 25 members at some point in time with different viewpoints. So it was real political work, so face-to-face, 3 months. And in the end of the day, I was sure that I could not trust everyone. I trusted that we have one common goal, so that politicians don't decide what art and culture is. And we knew that they are not professional in doing it, basically. They don't have the expertise. So this was the only goal that somehow connected us. And we did a lot of research work through it, actually. And everything was organized in such a way, we had a very tight structure, respecting procedures, a statute, a board, executive director, all voluntary work. And what we did is we only issued statements. No protests involving people in the street, artists or anything. Statements, media coverage, public pressure, basically. So we probably drafted around 30 policy statements within a year, daily confronting, let's say, power in the same language that they were trying to use. And it was told to me a long time ago by someone that in order for you to confront a state, and this was in relation to the occupation, you have to create the state mechanisms. And for us it was, okay, they have researchers, they have people, let's organize, have people. But it was a difficult process, not easy, but the aim was very clear. Initially, a lot of us were fooled by the idea they don't know what they're doing, they should stop this in a year or two. In my reading, the only way how to dismantle such a practice was to ask for resignation of the government or the Minister of Culture, which was also a deputy minister of the government. So it was a clear political struggle. And how to do this through the arts was especially difficult, but we had a lot of support from media, other important players in civil society organizations, the president of Kosovo, which was interesting also to have. So it was a unique struggle. In this context, I think it's much more complex. You have different bodies, you have cities, you have, I don't know what you have, but it's just, I think you need the proper reading of the context. You need to say things aloud. If you lose the freedom to speak, that's the end. You know, it's not, there's nothing more. And these spaces are important. I think ICI threw in front of us a huge challenge. If you read the first paragraph, you should read the first paragraph of the invitation several times, I think. For me, maybe just to mention in the end, something that I'm reading very often in my Ph.D. is a book by Oliver Marhart, Conflictual Aesthetics. It has a chapter about the curatorial function, and I just took some of it for you to read. In recognition of the scale of change required and the evolving role of curators. So he says, basically, the curatorial function lies in the organization of the public sphere. Crucially, however, he adds that a public sphere comes into being only when a debate breaks out among those present, a debate that unfolds through the medium of conflict. So this is how he sees our role in societies.
I would just add to that question, one of the, widening the scene of collaboration, so that's something I'm thinking a lot about. Dinga McHannon, one of the artists who gave one of the lessons in our, in the course that we're running now, mentioned that when she worked with and founded WIUSI and Where We At, the collectives from the 60s and 70s, they were really keen to have people who were business-minded, as she described it, you know, people who come from other spheres and other circles. So again, taking my cues from some of those practitioners and institution builders, because I'm really interested in art makers who have also been involved in institution making. So Dinga, of course, was involved in Where We At in WIUSI, and that was a keen bit of knowledge. So, advice.
Thank you all so much. This was really insightful. I'm wondering, what are you all's reflections on, like, the idea of play and expertise? I know you started with this beautiful image of Double Dutch, and like as thinking about structure, as thinking about gathering, curating to cure these like spaces and the public, and you know, just learning spheres and safe spaces, and you know, this idea of like liberation and revolution. Well, like, how do you all, think through this idea of play and expertise?
I'm horrible at it. Like, just full transparency. Because sometimes I have to get myself out of the fight, right? Because I always call it the blast work. It's like I'm constantly, like, I want all the smoke, right? But our other community partners, Sam Trotter and Jonte Spinks, they own Someday Gallery and Bakehouse. And so I think working with them has really opened me up to it. So it's like they have their signature. It's a gallery, right? So they do exhibitions, but they also serve like really cool baked or like experimental like baked goods. And one of their signature pieces is called a twerk. And so like you come in and you can kind of get your twerk, right? And they do like different versions of it, right, at different times of the year. So we do a lot of our programming with them. And upon getting the twerk, right, which is like a brioche bun, it's kind of like apple pie meets like a cinnamon roll. It's like so good. But they also have like series of questions, right, like very like kind of critical questions that sometimes they, relate to the show, sometimes they don't. They have toys and stuff around so you can kind of like come in and play. So they're very much so like getting me kind of out of the like constant need to kind of go at the system, all the time. I don't actually have a basis for it, in my career or like even in my practice. So it's like I'm still learning, how to do that. Like I've totally gotten the whole like R&R thing, where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm done. Like I can check out. I'm going to the spa. But like, so like the self-care part I do really well, but the play part I don't do well at all.
I'll jump in and say, I think for the project I'm doing, play is in experimentation. I love that question. So I think it's a little bit more experimenting. And what I mean by that ultimately is like being open to shape-shifting the thing. If it needs to change the next season or next cycle, I'm like, okay, let's do that. Let's experiment. Let's play with that. So I, don't actively use play, but I think it stands in for that experimentation and being open to let things morph and flow and be fluid and shapeshift. Yeah.
There's a seminal exhibition organized at, I think, Stockholm's Moderna Museet about play, and there's a publication, The Model, from the 60s, actually. So they installed the same director who was a founding director of Centre Pompidou, I think, so the first curator. I don't remember the name right now. So they installed a large playground within the museum. And the artist, the name, he was actively working in creating playgrounds around neighborhoods. And he makes a question whether it's more politically relevant at that time to create playgrounds or to engage in protests. Let's say playgrounds for children and adults and similar. So there are these projects all around. I don't know, sometimes in our program it seems like we lose ourselves in being too serious all the time about a lot of issues. But I think it's difficult to confront let's say, challenges that are on your face without really direct political action. Being that within an artistic cultural sphere or any similar. So if there would be a strategy that would work well and play would work well, of course we would employ it without any doubt. But sometimes I think political struggle is very important. I don't know.
Any other final questions before you got me thinking about the apple pie with the cinnamon rolls. I was like, oh, okay, lunchtime is coming. Any last questions, though? I don't want to cut anyone off. All right. Well, in that case, I'm just going to round of applause for all of our speakers.